Global warming, Part 2. What can be done?
Table of Contents, Global Warming Part 2.
Preface. Global warming, Part 2. What can be done? What can be done to reduce global warming? Learn about solar, wind, geothermal, and nuclear power.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. Dr. Sydney22@gmail.com. 2023. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltov. For a complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to tiny.1/ytnavigator.
Global warming, what can be done?
What can we do about global warming?
Conserve, adapt, and develop.
How to help prevent global warming? The most practical way to prevent global warming is to not use as much of the stuff that creates greenhouse gases. On a local level, people can help by using less energy.
We can reduce, reuse, and recycle.
Ranking the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle in order of importance. Should we give reduce the first place, followed by reuse at a third place for recycle? Or should they all rank the same?
Adapt. Limit development in low elevation coastal regions. Plan for changes in water resources. And plan for changes in agricultural areas.
This shows the projected worldwide percentage change in agricultural production due to global warming.
The most effective way to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases is to develop non-fossil fuel energy sources. Hydroelectric power, solar power, wind and tidal power, geothermal power, and nuclear power are all ways to cut down emissions.
This shows the percentage of electrical output from renewable energy sources for several leading countries.
Chapter 2. Solar power.
One important type of solar power is solar cells.
Solar cells make use of photovoltaic energy conversion. That is the direct conversion of sunlight to electricity.
This is the rooftop of a house with an array of solar cells.
Solar panels are a principal source of satellite power.
This shows solar power generation for a house.
This is a large array of solar cells for power generation.
This is the California State University, Los Angeles Solar Eagle 3, a solar-powered car that won a national championship.
Solar cells use photovoltaic energy conversion. Light energy from the sun in the form of photons in a material called a semiconductor, such as silicon, produces a flow of electricity.
We will now have a video on solar cells.
Sunlight is made up of tiny packets of energy called photons. Every minute, enough of this energy reaches the Earth to meet the world's energy demand for a whole year. Photovoltaic panels consist of many solar cells. These are made of materials like silicon, one of the most common elements on Earth. The individual cell is designed with a positive and a negative layer to create an electric field, just like in a battery. As photons are absorbed in the cell, their energy causes electrons to become free. The electrons move toward the bottom of the cell and exit through the connecting wire. This flow of electrons is what we call electricity. By combining solar cells and photovoltaic panels, we can produce just the right amount of electricity to perform a specific job, no matter how large or small.
Another type of solar power is called solar thermal.
Solar thermal energy conversion uses heat produced by sunlight to produce electricity.
This is a 10-megawatt solar power tower, called Solar 2 in the Mojave Desert near Barstow, California.
The 10 megawatt produced here is enough electricity to supply the needs of almost 3,000 houses.
This is another view of the 10-megawatt solar power tower. The many mirrors reflect the sunlight onto the receiver at the top of the tower.
We will now have a short video clip about solar thermal energy in Israel.
The new Solar Energy Development Center in Israel's Negev Rotem Industrial Park is more than just a bright idea, it's the promise of a bright future. Bright Source Energy and subsidiary Luz 2 have created the world's first operational solar thermal field, which will serve as a testing site for 5 larger solar fields the company plans to build in California's Mojave Desert over the next decade.
This facility is basically being used to validate the performance of the technology and the cost of the technology for the purposes of being able to finance the first real commercial plant in the States.
The pilot center aims to prove that clean energy can be generated reliably, more efficiently, and at a lower cost than ever before.
What's the most unique about what BrightSource does is we use higher temperature and higher pressure to really push efficiency high, which drives costs down. So with the ability to drive costs down, you can compete head-to-head with fossil fuels.
The competition is already heating up. This past April, BrightSource secured one of the biggest contracts in solar power history with Pacific Gas and Electric.
The plants they plan to build will add 900 megawatts of capacity to our system and deliver enough energy to serve more than 300,000 homes.
BrightSource's exclusive technology is more efficient than any other technology in 3 specific ways, according to the company. The heliostats are cheaper to build and maintain. There's no need for oil since the water is directly heated. They achieve a higher concentration of sunlight, creating higher temperatures of up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The 1,600 computerized mirrors, or heliostats, concentrate the sun's rays and natural energy onto the boiler, which sits at the top of the 60-meter tower. This heats the water to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. From the receiver, the superheated pressurized steam.
Another type of solar thermal energy conversion is for water heating.
Sunlight absorbed by these pipes heats the water inside.
We will now have a video clip about solar thermal energy in Denmark.
Denmark, which is a world leader in wind energy, is not the first country that springs to mind when it comes to solar energy. But the tiny island of Aro in the south of the kingdom is determined to prove that harnessing the power of the sun is possible, even in this windswept region of northern Europe. This is the town of Marstal. With its church, wooden houses and football field, it looks like any other small town in Denmark. But there's one big difference. Almost all the households get their domestic hot water and part of their heating needs from a solar energy plant on the outskirts of town. With a total of over 18,000 square meters of panels, Marstal is the world's largest solar thermal plant. The principle of this technology is simple. The sun warms up the large black surfaces of the solar panels, which in turn heat the water that's piped through them. When it reaches 70 degrees, the hot water is then stored in a tank before it's pumped directly to the town's houses. From May until September, the plant produces 100% of Marstal's hot water, while over the course of the year it provides a third of the town's total heating. The benefits are huge. Each year the solar thermal system saves the need to incinerate 9,000 litres of waste oil. The site has even become something of a tourist attraction. Plant manager Leo Holm believes important lessons can be learned from the experiment that began over a decade ago on this remote island in the Baltic Sea.
When we can produce solar energy in Denmark, we can produce solar energy all over in Europe. So there should be no problem. So I hope more people will install solar panels all over in Europe so we can get rid of all the oil and save our world for CO2 emission.
Solar energy is popular on the island of Airo because it's proved cheap, clean and reliable. Steen Felter is a retired librarian who installed solar-powered underfloor heating when he restored his house.
To us it's an advantage because this tiny room, if I had to have a central heating here with fuel, I couldn't have this. And I have an extra kitchen, you might say. So we have no smell from fuel oil. It's safe. We haven't had one interruption. So it's a little contribution to less pollution.
Many of the solar panels used on Airo are produced in this factory in Kolga, outside the Danish capital Copenhagen. There's a heavy demand for these panels now because the market for solar thermal energy in Europe is booming. Over 2 million European families directly benefit from sustainable heating and cooling, and sales of solar systems are growing by almost 50% a year. For factory owner Emmanuel Bender, the advantages of solar thermal are clear.
If you can achieve heat with solar energy, you are not taking anything from nowhere. You use the energy from the sun today, and tomorrow when you have the shower, you deliver again the energy to the surroundings.
Bender practices what he preaches. The solar panels on his roof produce 3,000 litres of hot water, ample for a family of 5. With thick walls, underground heating and a wood stove, 85% of this house's heating and hot water comes from clean sources. Solar-heated buildings are commonplace in Koga. The solar panels on this apartment block provide enough heating for 144 families, while this campsite gets all its hot water from the sun's rays. But such systems still only account for a tiny percentage of the EU's total energy consumption that's gobbled up by heating and cooling. So what changes are needed to realize solar thermal's full potential? Uwe Trenkner is Secretary General of the European Solar Thermal Industry Federation.
The most important thing for us would be that new buildings are equipped with solar thermal from the beginning, because then it's the most economical point to install them, and you just foresee them when you build the building, and then these buildings will stand for 50, 100, sometimes even longer. And it just does not make sense to us to build buildings still based on fossil fuels when everybody knows they are bad in terms of environment, but also in terms of our dependence on oil and gas.
Solar panels and storage tanks are a common sight in southern Europe. These days, solar domestic hot water systems are more discreet, but there will be a lot more of them on roofs in years to come. In 2006, the Spanish government passed a law requiring the installation of solar thermal panels in all new buildings. The effect has been a dramatic rise in capacity. The panels on this new apartment block in Seville will provide heating and cooling for 88 flats, bringing financial and environmental benefits to tenants.
Aparte del ahorro que tiene cada vecino en su factura, ahorro económico, que le sale más económica su agua caliente, hasta un 80%, ese vecino está dejando de emitir toneladas de CO2, de gases contaminantes, al medio ambiente. Pues está dejando de emitir una cantidad equivalente al 80-90% de lo que emite una familia normal.
Roughly 90% of the solar thermal market in the EU is in the residential sector. This second home, nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada in Andalusia, is typical of the small-scale systems found all over Europe. The 800-litre boiler produces enough water for the needs of 12 people and even runs on olive waste when the sun isn't shining. The technician who installed the system believes the 2,000 to 3,000 euro investment in solar technology made by the owners is money well spent.
Es una inversión inicial que luego tiene su ahorro y su satisfacción de ser una energía no contaminante, una energía limpia y producir tú mismo el agua que consumes. Y esto tiene también una importancia que se puede traducir en un coste económico también, ¿no?
On a somewhat more grandiose scale is this solar thermal tower plant near Seville, which is the first of its kind in the world. Here, 624 automatically adjustable panels concentrate the sun's rays on a solar receiver 100 meters up. The receiver harnesses this energy to produce steam, which in turn feeds a turbine to make electricity. When completed, this complex will produce enough electricity to power most of the homes in Seville. This will prevent the emission of 600,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year helping both Spain and the European Union to meet their greenhouse gas reduction targets. The solar industry, which employs over 20,000 people in Europe, is also a precious source of jobs in southern Spain. Francisco Bas Jimenez is Director General of the Andalucía Energy Agency.
Tenemos muy claro que las energías renovables en general y la energía solar en particular son unas grandes generadoras de riqueza y de empleo. Y por supuesto, la generación de empleo desde las energías renovables es muy superior a la que crean las energías convencionales.
The European Commission's Sustainable Energy Europe campaign promotes wider use of solar thermal energy, which is clean, inexhaustible, and immediately available for all potential consumers. It could also contribute to the European Union's objective to cover 20% of its energy consumption from renewable sources by the year 2020.
Chapter 3. Wind Power.
These are GE wind turbines spinning in the Tehachapi Mountains of California.
This is a wind power farm at the San Gorgonio Pass in Southern California.
Of course, wind power farms do not generate wind, but rather the wind turns the giant blades that turn turbines to produce electricity.
This wind farm on the San Gorgonio Mountain Pass in the San Bernardino Mountains contains more than 4,500 separate windmills
and provides enough electricity to power the city of Palm Springs and the entire Coachella Valley.
The largest of these windmills stands 150 feet tall, with blades half the length of a football field.
The compartments at the top containing the generator, hub and gearbox weigh 30,000 to 45,000 pounds. A wind turbine's cost can range upwards to $300,000 and can produce 300 kilowatts.
Under normal circumstances, a turbine will produce more energy than was required to manufacture the turbine in less than 6 months, often in only 3 to 4 months.
Production of wind turbines has become one of Denmark's largest industries, both for domestic as well as for export.
This is a turbine blade convoy passing through Edenfield in the UK. Even longer two-piece blades are now manufactured and then assembled on-site to reduce difficulties in transportation.
Wind power is the conversion of wind energy into a useful form, such as electricity, using wind turbines. At the end of 2009, worldwide capacity of wind-powered generators was 159 gigawatts.
Although wind produces only 2% of worldwide electricity use, it accounts for approximately 19% of electricity production in Denmark, 13% in Spain and Portugal, and 7% in Germany, and 7% in the Republic of Ireland.
Globally, wind power generation increased more than 10 times between 2000 and 2009.
Wind energy penetration is the fraction of energy produced by wind compared with the total generation. The wind power penetration in world electric power generation in 2015 was 3.5%.
This shows the approximate wind energy penetration in countries with the greatest installed wind power capacity as of the end of the year 2015.
This is the wind power as a percentage of the total electricity production in the countries with the most installed wind power capacity.
This is the worldwide wind power generation cumulative capacity in 2014.
These are the top wind power producing countries in 2016.
At the end of 2009, the United States wind power installed capacity was 35 gigawatts, which is enough to serve 8 million average households.
Wind power accounted for 35% of all new U.S. electric generating capacity in 2007. American wind farms will generate an estimated 48 billion kilowatt-hours of wind energy in 2008. That is just over 1% of the U.S. electricity supply.
This is a graph of the global installed wind power capacity. The global capacity for wind power increased by more than 20 times in the 15 years from 2001 to 2015.
This is a graph showing the growth of the global wind power capacity from 1996 to 2016.
This is a global map of the wind speed at 100 meters above surface level.
This is a graph of the worldwide wind energy capacity.
This is another graph of the worldwide wind energy capacity.
This is a table showing the installed worldwide wind energy capacity of various countries.
These are the top 10 countries by wind power electricity production, 2010 totals.
Top 10 countries by wind power capacity by the end of 2011.
These are the top 13 countries by wind power electricity production, 2010 totals.
This is a graph of the worldwide wind energy capacity.
This is a graph of the worldwide installed wind energy production.
This shows the wind power potential of various states in the U.S.
This shows the installed wind power capacity of various states in the U.S. in 2009.
This is the U.S. wind power capacity.
This is the U.S. annual and cumulative wind power capacity.
We will now have another video clip about wind power.
Wind power. Wind, although it might not need explaining, is moving air caused by differences in atmospheric pressure. Wind speeds vary based on geography, topography, and season. Because of this, like other renewables, there are some locations better suited for wind energy generation than others. In fact, there are optimal wind locations both onshore and offshore. Energy is derived from wind by converting the air's motion into mechanical energy. Traditionally, this energy was used for milling grain and pumping water, but today is most commonly used to create electricity. The mechanism used to convert air motion into electricity is referred to as a turbine. A turbine is a large structure with several spinning blades, usually 3. These blades are connected to an electromagnetic generator that generates electricity when the wind causes the blades to spin. Wind is becoming an increasingly important part of the global electricity supply mix. A major advantage of wind is that the production of electricity has no direct CO2 emissions. But wind generation is not without its challenges. As everyone knows, the wind does not blow all the time, causing intermittency issues for power grids. The price tag of wind power has traditionally been higher than conventional electricity generation sources, though the wind cost curve has declined significantly in recent years. NIMBY concerns such as land use, noise, and bird disruption have also been raised in certain areas. That's wind power.
We will now have a short video clip about wind power.
Wind is a powerful source of energy on our planet. In fact, many of us have seen it in action, propelling sailboats across open seas or turning the blades of a farm's windmill to grind grain or pump water. Modern wind turbines are basically sleeker, higher-tech versions of the windmills of the past. But instead of using the wind to do farm work, they're designed to convert wind energy into electricity. Here's how it works. Wind blowing across a turbine's blade creates more pressure on one side of the blade than the other. This causes the mechanism of all 3 connected blades to turn. This rotation pushes on a series of spinning parts inside the body of the turbine, which in turn spins a generator, producing electricity. Because wind is always blowing somewhere across the surface of the Earth, it's considered a renewable resource. And because the only thing required to turn a wind turbine is moving air, wind farms emit no greenhouse gases. However, even though it's clean and abundant, there are a number of reasons we still don't use wind power more widely. The first, and perhaps most important, is that the wind doesn't always blow, at least not always in the same spot, and technologies for storing lots of electricity for later use are currently very expensive. Another problem is location. It doesn't make sense to put wind farms just anywhere. The best sites are open, windy places, which are often far from city centers where energy demand is greatest. So long transmission lines are necessary to move the electricity to where it's needed. Finally, while wind farms are relatively cheap to operate, they cost a lot to build, especially in comparison to existing coal and natural gas power plants. The result is that many wind projects simply never get off the ground. At the moment, wind power makes up only a small portion of the electricity produced in America, but it's a rapidly growing industry that many experts believe could one day slash fossil fuel consumption. And just like solar, it will become cheaper and easier to use if we can find better ways to store the electrical energy it generates.
We will now have another short video clip about wind power.
We've all seen those creaky old windmills on farms, and although they may seem about as low-tech as you can get, those old windmills are the predecessors for new modern wind turbines that generate electricity. The same wind that used to pump water for cattle is now turning giant wind turbines to power cities and homes. Okay, have a look at this wind farm in the California desert. A hot desert next to tall mountains, an ideal place for a lot of wind. Here's another one on the windy prairies of Wyoming. Now, today's wind turbines are much more complicated machines than the old prairie windmills, but the principle is the same. Both capture the wind's energy. Okay, here's how it works. First, a wind turbine blade works sort of like an airplane wing. Blowing air passes around both sides of the blade. The shape of the blade causes the air pressure to be uneven, higher on one side of the blade and lower on the other. And that's what makes it spin. The uneven pressure causes the blades to spin around the center of the turbine. On the top, there's a weather vane that's connected to a computer to keep the turbine turned into the wind so it captures the most energy. Now the blades are attached to a shaft, which only turns about 18 revolutions a minute, and that's not nearly fast enough to generate electricity by itself. So, the rotor shaft spins a series of gears that increase the rotation up to about 1,800 revolutions per minute. And at that speed, the generator can produce a lot of electricity. So, why are wind turbines so tall? Well, the higher up you go, the windier it is. More wind naturally means more electricity. And in many cases, larger turbines can also capture wind energy more efficiently. The blades can sweep a circle in the sky as long as a football field. Now, what's really cool is that even a small wind farm, like this one in Wyoming, can generate enough electricity to power more than 9,000 homes. And larger farms can provide much more clean energy for our homes and businesses.
The cost of a wind turbine. The graph above gives an impression of the price range of modern Danish grid-connected wind turbines as of 1998. As you can see, prices vary for each generator size.
Of course, there is always opposition to the various means of producing energy, even including wind power.
We have questions. Now we want some answers.
Windmills to generate electricity sound like a good idea. Where can I buy a windmill for my backyard?
How about Walmart?
This is an Alico 3000-watt, 48-volt wind turbine generator, with a price tag of $1,544, which amounts to 50 cents per watt.
How about Sam's Club?
These are wind turbines that generate 400 watts at a cost of about $1 to $1.40 per watt.
How about Home Depot?
Here's a SunForce 400-watt, 12-volt wind turbine sold by Home Depot for $575.
How about from Amazon?
This is an Automax wind turbine generator that produces 1,200 watts at 48 volts. The price is $1,200.
What do you think about buying some wind turbines for your house? Is it a good idea?
How about a solar panel to generate electricity?
How about Amazon?
This is a Tree Public solar cell panel system that generates a peak output of 10 kilowatts for $22,000. That is $2.20 per watt. A 4 kilowatt system costs $10,000 or $2.50 per watt.
This is a 5,300 watt solar power kit at a cost of $7,647, which is $1.44 per watt.
How about Walmart?
This is a Renaji solar panel system that generates a peak output of 800 watts at 24 volts. The price is $1,600, so the cost per watt is $2.
What do you think about buying some solar panels for your house? Is it a good idea?
What does this all mean in terms of cost relative to what you are already paying for electricity?
This is an example of solar payback time.
This is the average retail price of electricity in the U.S. in cents per kilowatt-hour.
The average cost of residential electricity was 12 cents per kilowatt-hour in the U.S. in 2016, and ranged from 7 cents in North Dakota to 26 cents in Hawaii.
My average electricity usage last year, January to December, was 550 kilowatt-hours per month. That's with a high of 950 kilowatt-hours per month in the summer, and a low of 335 kilowatt-hours per month in winter.
What is the capital cost payback time of a 400-watt windmill that costs $600? Under ideal conditions of a strong wind blowing all of the time, 0.4 kilowatts times H hours times 12 cents per kilowatts hour equals $600. Solving for H gives H in hours equals $600 divided by $0.12 times 0.4 kilowatts equals 12,500 hours. 12,500 hours divided by 24 hours per day equals 520 days, or 1.4 years.
What is the capital cost payback time of a 3 kilowatts windmill that costs $1,500? Under ideal conditions of a strong wind blowing all of the time. 3 kilowatts times H in hours times $0.12 per kilowatt hour equals $1,500. Solving for H gives H in hours equals $1,500 divided by $0.12 times 3 kilowatts equals 4,167 hours. 4,176 hours divided by 24 hours per day equals 173 days equals 5.7 months.
However, under more realistic wind conditions, it would probably be several years.
What is the capital cost payback time of a 10 kilowatt solar panel that costs $22,000?
Even this is optimistic, assuming bright, clear days. A more realistic estimate would cut the amount of sunlight in half, giving us around 15 years as the payback time.
I heard some politicians talking about cow emissions being a problem. What's that all about?
Can kangaroos help to combat global warming?
Cows pass a lot of methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas.
Eating kangaroo meat instead of beef can help a lot.
Tell me more. Chapter 7. Geothermal Power.
Geothermal power uses heat from deep within the earth as an energy source.
The flow of very hot water from deep within the earth is used as the heat source to produce steam to power a turbine and produce electric power.
We will now have a video clip about geothermal energy.
You may have relaxed in a natural hot springs pool, or seen the old faithful geyser blasting hot water into the air in Yellowstone National Park. But have you ever thought of where all that heat comes from? Well, it comes from deep beneath the surface of the Earth, and it's called geothermal energy. And we can use it to generate clean, renewable electricity. Okay, here's how geothermal works. Heat from the Earth's crust warms water that has seeped into underground reservoirs. In some places, when water becomes hot enough, it can break through the Earth's surface as steam or hot water. This usually happens where the Earth's crust, or plates, meet and shift. In the past, taking advantage of geothermal energy was limited to areas where hot water flowed near the surface. But as geothermal technologies advance, we can leverage even more of these natural, renewable energy sources. Engineers have developed a few different ways to produce power from geothermal wells drilled into the ground. Have a look at this. It's a dry steam geothermal power plant, and it's the most common type of geothermal technology used today. Underground steam flows directly to a turbine to drive a generator that produces electricity. Pretty straightforward. Another geothermal technology is called a flash steam power plant. A pump pushes hot fluid into a tank at the surface, where it cools. As it cools, the fluid flashes, or quickly turns into vapor. The vapor then drives a turbine and powers a generator. A binary cycle plant works differently. It uses two types of fluid. Hot fluid from underground heats a second fluid, called a heat transfer fluid, in a giant heat exchanger. The second fluid has a much lower boiling point than the first fluid, and so it flashes into vapor at a lower temperature. When the second fluid flashes, it spins a turbine that drives a generator. The environmental benefits of this clean, round-the-clock, renewable energy source are substantial. Low emissions, small physical footprint, and minimal environmental impact. The few byproducts that can come up are often re-injected underground. Geothermal energy can also help recycle wastewater. In California, wastewater from the city of Santa Rosa is injected into the ground to generate more geothermal energy. Some plants do produce solid waste, but that solid waste may contain minerals that we can remove and sell, which lowers the cost of this energy source. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that untapped geothermal resources in the United States, if developed, could supply the equivalent of 10% of today's energy needs and cut our dependence on fossil fuels. In fact, electricity generated by geothermal energy already provides about 60% of the power along the Northern California coast, from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon state line. Geothermal energy, helping to push America toward energy independence and a clean, renewable way to meet our growing energy demands.
We will now have another video clip about geothermal energy.
Geothermal energy gives us a steady supply of electrical power with minimal environmental impact. Here is the basic process. Water in underground reservoirs is heated to high temperatures by magma. Production wells drilled up to 10,000 feet below the Earth's surface tap into this hot fluid. Under its own pressure, the fluid flows through these wells toward the surface. As it travels, the pressure lessens, causing a small amount to become steam. Together, the hot fluid and steam move through a surface pipeline to a wellhead separator, where the pressure is reduced. Here, most of the fluid vaporizes and flashes into high-pressure steam. Any fluid not flashed into steam moves to a standard pressure crystallizer to produce standard pressure steam. Remaining fluid is then flashed at a lower pressure to create low-pressure steam. All steam created in the plant is sent to a turbine on site. The force of the steam spins the turbine's blades, which turns a shaft connected to an electrical generator. An electrical charge is created and directed to a transformer, where the voltage is increased and sent down power lines. Any fluids not flashed into steam return to the underground reservoir, where, in time, they will be reheated and reused. Geothermal energy, a simple, clean, and renewable energy source.
Chapter 8. Nuclear Power.
Some people find nuclear power to be scary, but I'm willing to listen. Tell me more. The Shippingport Atomic Power Station was the first full-scale nuclear power plant. It is located on the Ohio River in western Pennsylvania, about 25 miles from Pittsburgh. It was in operation for 25 years from 1957 until 1982.
This is a map of the United States showing the locations of operating nuclear power reactors.
The partial meltdown at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant occurred in 1979. Since the accident, not a single new nuclear power plant has been ordered in the United States. In fact, 74 plants under construction at the time of the accident were canceled.
This is a graph of the number of nuclear power reactors that are active or under construction worldwide.
Note the abrupt leveling off after the incident at 3 Mile Island in 1979, and especially after the disaster at Chernobyl in 1986.
This shows the history of nuclear power in terms of generated electric power.
This graph shows the decrease in the U.S. nuclear power capacity if there is no new construction of power plants.
This is the worldwide nuclear power generation situation as of 2005.
This is a graph of the nuclear power plant's construction by country.
We will now have a video clip about nuclear power.
This huge building you see behind me is one of Ontario Power Generation's nuclear power generating stations. In essence, it's a factory that converts the energy of the atom into a flow of electrons, or what's commonly called electricity, the electricity that helps power the province. Nuclear, hydroelectric, and fossil fuel generating stations have many similarities in the way they generate electricity. Where they differ is their fuel source. OPG's nuclear stations use naturally occurring uranium as processed into little ceramic pellets like this. An unused fuel pellet emits very little radiation. However, it holds the potential to produce a whole lot of energy. Just 8 of these pellets will power an average house for almost 1 year. The fuel pellets are sealed into metal tubes, which are then welded together to form a fuel bundle. Several thousand fuel bundles are then inserted into a large tank called a calandria, which is the heart of the nuclear reactor. Nuclear generating stations split the uranium atoms in the fuel in a process called fission, and the result is the release of a tremendous amount of heat. To unlock the heat energy in the uranium atoms, you need what's called a moderator. In CANDU reactors, a special kind of water called heavy water is used as the moderator. Heavy water is 10% heavier than ordinary water because it contains a higher than normal proportion of deuterium, which is a form of hydrogen. The heavy water surrounds the fuel bundles and slows down tiny particles called neutrons, so they are more likely to hit and split the uranium atom. A chain reaction of atoms splitting ensures there is a constant source of heat to heat the heavy water. The heated heavy water is pumped through the reactor in a closed system to a set of boilers, where it boils ordinary water into high-pressure steam. The heavy water, having done its job, is recirculated back to the reactor to pick up more heat and cool the fuel. The high-pressure steam, made from ordinary water, is transported through pipes to a large turbine, where it pushes the blades and turns the shaft connected to a rotor in the generator, causing the rotor to spin. The spinning rotor is a large electromagnet that produces a rotating magnetic field. This field moves across coils of copper wire in the generator stator, producing electricity that can be sent across transmission lines. The steam coming out of the turbine is condensed back into water using cooling water from the lake and pumped back to the boilers to continue the process. Ontario Power Generation's nuclear generating stations have sophisticated safety systems to control, cool, and contain the process each step of the way, generating electricity safely and virtually free of all smog and greenhouse gas emissions.
We will now have a short video about nuclear power loops.
In a pressurized water reactor, water is enclosed in 3 separate but interacting loops. In loop 1, water becomes intensely hot as it absorbs heat from the energy of nuclear fission. But because it is under very high pressure, the water doesn't boil and remains a liquid. Pipes from loop 1 wind through a steam generator tank that is part of a second, lower pressure water loop. Heat from loop 1 boils the water in the steam generator, and the energy from the steam powers turbines that drive electricity generators. The steam is then cooled and condensed in a heat exchange with a third water loop, which carries water from the cooling tower. The liquid water in loop 2 then returns to the steam generator where it is reheated and the cycle continues.
Paris is the city of lights. And these are lights powered to a great extent by nuclear energy. In fact, nearly 80% of France's power comes from nuclear power plants, and that number is growing.
We see that in France almost 80% of electrical power is produced by nuclear reactors, and only about 10% is by fossil fuels.
We will now have a video about nuclear power in France.
Since Chernobyl, most European nations have been moving away from nuclear power, but not France. Here on the coast of Normandy, workers are building a new $4 billion reactor, the third in the town of Flamanville, and France's 59th. Per capita, that's more than any other country in the world.
It has worked for years and years and years, from the end of the Second World War, you see, without any accident.
You trust the French engineers?
Yeah, I do.
But not everyone is convinced. Jan Wehrling is the spokesman for France's Green Party.
The nuclear energy lobby is very important in France because they have millions of euros, and they spend these euros in advertising to convince the population that nuclear is safe, sure, modern, and this all is not true.
The biggest danger, Greens say, is nuclear waste, what the electrical utility calls stockage or recycling. Right now, spent fuel rods are stored underground, where critics insist they remain a deadly threat, but the government strongly supports nuclear power.
Nuclear plants for France is both an economic and an ecological opportunity.
Nuclear energy provides nearly 80% of France's electricity at one of the lowest rates in Europe, and without generating tons of greenhouse gases. Two key factors French officials believe will change minds about nuclear energy in the rest of the world.
Nuclear is not the unique solution, but it's really a part of the solution. And if you avoid nuclear, you are not going to be able to solve the global problem. That's true in Europe. That's true in the States.
In fact, there's a growing consensus in the United States, even among some environmental groups, that nuclear energy has got to be a part of the package in terms of providing for America's growing energy needs. Last month, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission accepted the first application for a new nuclear plant in the United States since 1978. More applications are in the pipeline. In Paris, Greg Burke, Fox News.
Should we be like the French?
We will now have a video. Let's do it like France does it. Nuclear power.
With power demands rising and concerns over global warming increasing, what the world needs now is an efficient means of producing large amounts of carbon-free energy. And one of the few available options is nuclear, a technology whose time seemed to come and go and may now be coming again. For the first time in decades, new nuclear plants are being built, and not just in Iran and North Korea. With zero greenhouse gas emissions, the U.S. government, public utilities, and even some environmental groups are taking a second look at nuclear power. And one of the first places they're looking to is France, where it's been a resounding success. When much of the world spurned nuclear power 30 years ago, the French, being French, decided to go their own way and embrace it. Paris, the city of light, is lit by nuclear energy, which powers just about everything in France. Its homes, its factories, even its high-speed railroads. Nearly 80% of the country's electricity comes from 58 nuclear power plants crammed into a country the size of Texas. Pierre Gadonex, the head of Electricité de France, the country's national utility, says it all began with the French obsession for energy independence.
In France, we have nearly no coal, we have no oil, so clearly nuclear appeared to be the best way. And 30 years later, it appeared to be a very smart decision.
Because nuclear plants emit no greenhouse gases, France has the cleanest air in the industrialized world. And because the price of oil is now around $60 a barrel, it has the lowest electric bills in Europe. In fact, France has so much cheap electricity, it exports it to its European neighbors. French nuclear plants supply power to parts of Germany, Italy, and help light the city of London.
It is a very competitive way of producing electricity when oil prices are beyond, I would say, around $40 per barrel.
And the rest of the world has taken notice. Nearly a dozen countries, including the United States, are either building or planning to build new nuclear plants. And some of that business will go to Areva, the French government monopoly that controls every step of its nuclear industry, from uranium mining to plant construction to radioactive waste disposal. Deep in the wine country of Burgundy, in this massive factory, Areva is building the first European reactors since the Chernobyl disaster. What is happening with your business?
It's growing, definitely growing.
Bertrand Durand is Executive Vice President for Manufacturing. Is that where the fuel rods come through?
Yes.
Besides the new reactors it's building for France and Finland, Durand says Areva is bidding on a project to build 4 new nuclear reactors in China. How many plants do you think might be built in the next 20 years?
A minimum of 20, which is quite a change when you compare it to the past.
And some of them will almost certainly be in the United States, which hasn't built a new nuclear plant since the 1970s. With energy prices and global temperatures near the recorded highs, and the possibility that greenhouse gases will be regulated, the Bush administration is pushing a nuclear revival.
In many respects, the nuclear industry in the United States has disappeared.
Clay Sell is the Deputy Secretary of Energy and the administration's point man on nuclear power. With world energy demand expected to rise 50% over the next 25 years, he says nuclear is the only practical option for producing large amounts of electricity with no carbon emissions.
No serious person can look at the challenge of greenhouse gases and climate change and not come to the conclusion that nuclear power has to play a significant and growing role in meeting that challenge worldwide.
How much interest is there right now in building new plants?
There is a tremendous amount of interest. 2 years ago, there was exactly 0 plants on the drawing boards here in the United States. Today, there are about 15 companies talking about building over 30 commercial nuclear power reactors. Now, all of those won't get built, but we think there's a significant chance that many of them will be built.
But so far, no one has signed up to actually build one, an undertaking that requires a huge investment of capital and a certain amount of faith.
The purpose of our meeting today is to decide whether to shut down the Indian Point nuclear plants.
In the 1980s and 90s, political opposition, regulatory delays, cost overruns, and a drop in electricity demand forced utilities to pull the plug on dozens of projects, and the industry has a long memory.
There is some level of concern, but what we've found out and what we have seen is the more educated the public is, the more they understand the technology, the more comfortable and the more accepting they are.
Americans, he says, tend to forget that there are 103 nuclear plants operating in the United States that have produced 20% of the nation's electricity without major incident in the 28 years since 3 Mile Island.
And in fact, they have an outstanding record. There has never been a radiation-related death in the commercial nuclear sector in the United States, ever.
David Gerard, the head of science and research for the World Resources Institute, an environmental think tank in Washington, acknowledges that the industry's safety record has been pretty good.
Why are so many people afraid of it? When there's a small probability of a catastrophe, people think about the catastrophe and not the small probability.
Why have the French accepted it? And what is there about the two cultures that may influence that?
The French love high technology, whether it be nuclear power or supersonic airplanes or high-speed trains. They love that. And they accord huge respect and credibility to scientists and engineers. And scientists and engineers actually run these programs.
One of the things the French tell us is that they consider nuclear power to be a green energy source. Accurate?
Accurate, except for one thing, which is perhaps the Achilles heel of nuclear power. It's certainly accurate that the plants emit no carbon dioxide. The one thing that needs to be solved is the issue of long-term radioactive waste storage and management.
For decades, the United States has temporarily stored its radioactive waste on site at nuclear power plants, awaiting a permanent solution. The Yucca Mountain Repository in Nevada. It is years behind schedule, will cost $30 billion to open, and is already too small to hold all of the waste. The French have taken a different approach to the problem. While the United States decided to store its nuclear waste, the French embraced the idea of reprocessing it. Instead of burying the spent fuel rods underground or underwater, they decided to build this massive plant on the coast of Normandy and recycle the used fuel and reuse it. This high-security facility stretches for 2 miles along the coast. All of France's spent nuclear fuel eventually ends up here, in pools of water. If I fell in, would I die?
No. I hope that you can swim.
Yes.
Yes.
After the fuel rods have cooled for 5 years, the French recycle them to make new fuel. The process drastically reduces the amount of nuclear waste, but one of the byproducts of this is high-grade plutonium that can be used for nuclear weapons.
In our judgment, we have to recycle waste eventually. And recycling makes a lot of sense.
The big argument against reprocessing has been the fact that some high-grade plutonium that could be used in making a bomb could be stolen from the plant.
And we're quite concerned about that as well. And that's why the President has pursued a policy that says we shall develop advanced recycling technologies that do not result in separated plutonium.
The United States is leading an international effort to develop the process, but large-scale plutonium-free reprocessing is still decades off, and just one of a number of research projects that the industry hopes will improve upon a still young technology.
5 years ago, nuclear was dead. Now people are really buzzing about it.
MIT professor Andrew Kadak is working on a new generation of nuclear technology called the pebble bed reactor. Instead of using conventional fuel rods, the uranium is contained in hundreds of thousands of graphite balls, which would make it safer than conventional reactors.
This type of reactor is very unique in the sense that there's no way to melt this down.
Why?
Because the power inside each little pebble is so low that the temperatures here don't get high enough to reach the melting temperature of uranium. These reactors are exactly what people really want to see, and that is no meltdowns.
It's difficult to fight against climate change and at the same time to be against nuclear power, because you have not a lot of ways to produce energy without CO2 emissions. You have hydro, you have nuclear, you have wind, and you have solar. But wind and solar are, temporary sources of energy. It works when you have wind, it works when you have sun. No sun, no wind, no energy.
How about safety?
Which one is the most dangerous and which is the safest?
What is the safest way of producing energy? In terms of deaths per unit of energy produced.
The safest way to produce energy is coal, B oil, C natural gas, D nuclear, E hydroelectric, F wind, or G solar.
This is a graph showing the deaths produced per terawatt-hour of power generation. A terawatt is 1 trillion watts.
1 terawatt-hour is enough power to light over 1 million homes for a year, or fully power 70,000 homes for a year.
If nuclear is safe, and can produce lots of power, why aren't more nuclear plants being built?
What do you think about nuclear power? With the new nuclear technology, should it be started up again?
This is the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was damaged due to an earthquake in Japan.
At Fukushima Daiichi, the reactors shut down safely when struck by the magnitude 9 Tohoku earthquake, the fourth largest ever recorded. But problems arose after they were inundated by a much larger tsunami than had been anticipated when the nuclear plant was designed. This caused the loss of all power on the site, so that cooling systems failed and some of the reactor cores overheated. Radioactive fission products were released, and hydrogen was generated by a chemical reaction.
The reactor containments were partially effective, although they were damaged by hydrogen explosions and possibly by molten fuel. Again, the casualty figures tell their own story. Severe potential hazards did exist on the reactor sites because of high levels of radiation, but health controls were mainly effective. There were no deaths attributable to radiation. 2 workers received burns from beta radiation. They were discharged from the hospital after 2 days. 2 workers incurred high internal radiation exposure from inhaling iodine-131, which gives them a significant risk of developing thyroid cancer.
Doses incurred by about 100 other workers have been high enough to cause a small risk of developing cancer after 20 or more years. But the risk is very small indeed. About 25% of the population dies from cancer whether accidentally exposed to radiation or not. This rate might be increased by an additional 1 or 2% among the exposed workers. What is more, exposures to radiation were nowhere near high enough to cause acute radiation sickness. Importantly, there have been no radiation injuries to children or to other members of the public.
Here's a quick quiz. Readers, how many people have died as a result of the disaster at the Fukushima nuclear reactor? If you answered in the thousands, you're way off. If you answered 0, you're closer, but not quite right either. The correct, but rarely seen answer is 5, one man who became trapped in the console of a crane during the earthquake. 2 who were swept away by the tsunami, and a cleanup worker who suffered from a heart attack.
Another man reportedly died suddenly in October. Although the company is not revealing the cause of death, they say it was not related to radiation. The entire toll from the earthquake and tsunami, remember, is estimated to be in the region of 20,000. While it is not yet over, and radioactivity continues to come out of the devastated plant, the good news is that there are still precisely 0 deaths attributable to the release of radiation at the plant, and on the basis of doses received, 0 are expected. Table of Contents, Global Warming Part 2.
Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.